So hello everybody, today is another installment in Chits and Books, or Cats and Books. I'm going to talk about This Cursed House by Del Sandin. This is supposed to be a horror novel, and I will tell you it is supposed to be a horror novel because there is nothing even remotely spooky or frightening. It is, I would say, a supernatural book because there are ghosts in there and those ghosts are real. But if you are looking for a book to really frighten you, this is not the one, and you can actually stop watching here. For everybody else, there will be spoilers because I am going to give an in-depth summary of what happens in the book. And then at the end, I will tell you how I feel about it, but you will probably be able to tell how I feel about it even while I'm describing the content. The book itself is a series of 3 books that I have already finished and am in the process of finishing. Grady Hendrix, Horror, This September House, and This Cursed House. And the funny thing about this is these are the 3 books that I have most recently read and finished. Well, that's not true. There's also 5 Survive, which I finished 2 weeks ago. And they have a couple of things in common, which I realized yesterday. They are all set in the United States. They are all about haunted houses of some shape or form, and they all have a female protagonist. But other than that, they have very little in common because both the level of horror in them, from 0 to very high, as well as the level of quality of the books, vary greatly. So let's get cracking on This Cursed House. As you can tell by the cover, it is set in the Deep South. It's set in New Orleans. It's set on a plantation in the 1960s. So it's just after the death of Marilyn Monroe, and it's just at the same time as, there were the marches where schools were trying to be integrated. It's the time of the Kennedys. It's the time of the Civil Rights Movement. Martin Luther King is out and about. So that's the backdrop. And that could have made, in and of itself, for a very interesting story. Unfortunately, that's where it ends. The protagonist is Gemma Barker, and I believe this is to be her on the cover. And she refers to herself as a Negro, and they have different ways in which they refer to people who are not white. And I really hate to use the phrase not white because it kind of posits being white as the norm, and everything that is not white is abnormal. Unfortunately, this is how the book works. Being white is what people aspire to, what people want, except for Gemma. And the rest of the protagonists actually really want to be white. So I don't really know how to phrase it. She refers to herself as a Negro. Everybody else refers to Negroes as coloreds. When she comes to New Orleans, she's originally from Chicago. And so for her, there is a little bit of a clash. But again, to my mind, this could have been explored. It wasn't explored. So I will tell you a little bit about Gemma first, and what I'm going to tell you is not something that you get at the very beginning of the book, but it is told over the course of various chapters. But to summarize, she is Gemma Barker. She is a teacher, and she is from Chicago, and she's been adopted, but both her adoptive parents are dead, and we learn that at age 14 her father told her that they needed to tell her the truth, and basically broke it to her that she was adopted. And it turns out that he was never a really nice man, and we later learn that he actually wanted to have a son, a boy, but of course she's a girl. And her mother was only kind of like a slight help there. So she really, she had a tenuous relationship with her mother and a really bad one with her father. But then again, they never laid hands on her, so he never was abusive. He spanked her a couple of times. That's what she says. But there was never the hint of being in an abusive parent-child relationship, but her mother either kills herself by throwing herself in front of a bus, or the bus hits her. It's there are people who say one way or the other, and then she's alone with her father until she's 18. She moves out. She lives with a friend of hers, Betty. At some point, she does get an education. It's unclear to me how she actually paid for it, but, she becomes a teacher. And then she moves in with a guy named Marvin, and Marvin basically then impregnates another woman. She finds out. She takes a billiard cue to him. She whacks him. And he backhands her and her lips split. She goes home. She tries to kill herself. Marvin finds her and she is saved. She doesn't die, but she basically moves out. She crashes in Betty's guest room for a while. But then she's thrown out of her employment as a teacher because she's killed herself and nobody wants their children to be taught by a nutcase. And at that moment, she gets a letter from the Duchamp family in New Orleans who live on a plantation, and they want to hire her. And there are a couple of stipulations in the contract that she must abide by if she's going to keep her employment and to get the money. So she will get free room, free food, free everything, but she needs to stay on the plantation. She cannot leave. That's number one. Number two, they're going to pay her $300 a week. That's $1,200 per month. And I mean, even today, if somebody were to offer me life in a house, free rent, no rent, free food, free amenities, free everything, and then 1,200 euros, essentially pocket money, that would be tempting. That would be tempting. That's a really good deal. Because at least here in Germany, people usually pay almost between 1/3 and a half for rent alone, and then they haven't bought any groceries. So even today, this would be a really good deal. So she basically decides, she rings them and she speaks to Honorine Duchamp. And basically they say, okay, yeah, well, you come down, blah, blah, blah. She takes the train. She's very put out by the fact that suddenly they put colored signs as they cross a certain state line on the carts. There is no food cart for somebody who is colored. And she arrives in New Orleans. She's broke, essentially, and she is hungry, and she basically tries to find out how to get to the plantation. She talks to locals, and they're like, oh, the Duchamp family, you'd better run, girl, that's not a good idea. So basically then she takes the bus, and then she walks, but then she's picked up by some guy who drives a horse-drawn cart, and he takes her only to the front gate, and then he's off again. He's also a Negro. And she arrives, she walks up to the house, she knocks on the door is opened by a maid who doesn't say anything, and then Honorine Duchamp makes herself known, and these are beautiful people. They are white, they have blue eyes, they have blonde hair, they are just awesome, but a little bit out of touch with current fashion. So they all dress really weirdly. Oh, and yeah, and at that stage, Gemma is 27. And Honorine greets her. Everybody else is really nasty to her. But the funny thing is that she says something about, because she's definitely not dressed for the occasion and for the weather, because she's from Chicago and it's September-ish. And of course, she would wear whatever is worn in Chicago at the time. But of course, New Orleans is a completely different climate, and she's sweating like crazy. And they mentioned something like, this would not have been, this is more like our ancestors in Africa. And she's taken aback because, what about our ancestors? These people are clearly white. And it turns out that they are not. They are colored. And that's what they refer themselves to as. And she says, well, you shouldn't say colored, you should say Negro and blah, blah, blah. No, we're colored. And she is confused, as was I, as the reader, because I'm like, I cannot even begin to think what these people look like. Because to the eyes of Gemma, they are white. To their own eyes, they seem to be not white, but colored. What whatever that means, whatever shade of skin and facial traits that entails. But anyway, they refer to themselves as colored. And so basically she's shown to a room, which is really nice. She has her own bathroom, and but she notices the smell of burning around the house. There's like a whiff of something that has burnt or is still kind of like smoldering away somewhere. And she also says that the food tastes like that. And the family are really, well, I mean, they are really kind of standoffish. There are 5 in total. There is Honorine, there are her 2 children, and Honorine is, I want to say, an octogenarian. She has 2 children, Russell and his sister Simone. And Simone has 2 children, Laurence and Fosette. I'm going to use the French way of pronouncing their names because they make a point of saying that they are of French descent, although being colored, that's not very likely. They're not purely of French descent. And at some point, very late in the book, they even start speaking French patois every so often. But it's unclear to me and to the reader until very late in the game that they actually do speak French and can read French, because that becomes important later. So she basically is very taken aback by the fact that there is no child for her to tutor, because she kind of arrived under the assumption that she was going to tutor a child. They don't have any children, because why would they hire her? They know that she's a teacher, or do they? I mean, what do they know about her? Anyway, it turns out that Honorine, the octogenarian, wants her to organize her calendar and also put the library in order. I mean, she could start right here if she's ever free, because that's what needs to be done. The problem is that Honorine doesn't have any engagements. I mean, in the calendar, it's like afternoon nap, tea with Fosette, a game of croquet in the garden. She doesn't go out. Nobody ever comes to the house. But, keeping that calendar, that diary would be really good for me, because that means, like chilling, sitting back and just spending all of my time in the library. And it is said that Honorine is the one person who has read every single book in the library, and the library is vast. She then encounters Dennis, who is kind of like the handyman gardener, blah, 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 also a Negro. And Agnes, of course, or Agnès, I guess, the maid who basically, doesn't speak and, and everybody treats her really badly. And so as time progresses, she is told that she needs to order the library, but she doesn't even know how to start. She says, well, what would you like me to do? Would you like me to take the classics and put them on here, and then blah, 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 and then alphabetically by color, whatever. And the one thing that we also, and this is very important, I apologize, she can also see ghosts. She's been seeing ghosts ever since she was a small child. Her step-parents have tried to not beat it out of her, but to get it out of her by saying, okay, close your eyes, count back from 5, and then ignore them. But the problem is that this doesn't work. The ghosts still come back. And this time around, she also sees ghosts in the house. But she's not really surprised by this, because she sees them all the time. And the house being as old as it is, one would expect people to have died there. I mean, yeah, they have their own cemetery. And so after a while, she is kind of in the library, and then it is broken to her that the family is cursed, which is why they can't leave the property. They cannot leave the property at all. They cannot leave. And she is also cursed because, lo and behold, she's the grandchild of Honorine. Yes. Her mother, Gemma's mother, on giving birth, was told, oh, you have a darky, and again, their words, not mine, child, you have to get rid of her or we will kill you. And we will kill her. So the child is given away. Somehow we find out that it's given to the midwife, who's also a darky, who lives now in the woods, and Gemma encounters her because she realizes she's not cursed, although she should be because she's part of the family, but she can actually leave the perimeter. She can cross the perimeter, she can leave the confines of the house, and she actually at some point also breaks the news to the family, hey guys, I'm not cursed, blah, 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 and also you are nasty people. So it turns out that her mother gave her to the midwife, Magdalene, and told her to send the child as far away as possible. Magdalene, on the other hand, was a bit unhappy about this because Magdalene previously had lost her own daughter, who was like 2 years old or something, and she would have wanted to keep the child, but of course she honors the wishes of the mother, Ines, and sends the child away to the Barkers, who were from the south and who are moving north, and basically, yeah, and it all unravels from there because Gemma has a terrible childhood. Anyway, you see where I'm getting at? Everything is kind of guilt, guilt, guilt. Everybody's guilty, nobody can forgive, everybody's unhappy. So far so good, because that could make for powerful storytelling, only it doesn't. Long story short, Agnes is actually Ines, Gemma's mother, who didn't die. Although there's a grave for her, they have cut out her tongue so that she cannot curse them anymore, or even worse. They have been behaving nastily to her, and that's really the part that's really unsettling about the book, the way they treat Ines. The fact that they cut out her tongue, I find that really unsettling. And they are actually just nasty pieces of work. They are really terrible people. There is no redeeming factor about them whatsoever. And they do not change over the course of the book. There is no character development. And then Gemma finds, and she kind of, has feelings for Laurence, who's about her own age, and he's very attractive, blah, blah, blah. But then she catches Fosette and Laurence in a sex act. They're brother and sister, remember? So it's kind of like, oh my God, terrible. But then she basically blurts out, oh, I saw what you did. And then they're like, okay, yeah, we need to tell you, we're actually not brother and sister. We are cousin and cousin. So that kind of makes it less problematic, because the family basically has told her that they always intermarry because they want to keep the whiteness of the face going. And it turns out that Laurence is actually her own brother. Gemma and Laurence are siblings because Ines had a first child before she had a second child. And they both have different fathers, and both fathers were Negroes, but only Gemma came out darky. So essentially, Gemma realizes she is not stuck, but her mother is. And another part of the family curse is that every 7 years on Gemma's birthday, a member of the family dies. And of course, now it's like a race against time. I'm turning 28 in March. Is my mother going to be next? So she really has the incentive, or am I next? Because I can leave the premises, but who knows, maybe the curse does affect me. So she's trying to break the curse. She manages to do so. Everybody can leave the building. It's great, they can leave, and they actually go on a shopping spree. They plan a trip to Paris. They are rich, rich, rich. They are super rich because their granddaddy or whoever invested in shipping, and of course New Orleans being a port town, so they are loaded. They are super rich. The problem is that being secluded for 28 years, they couldn't really spend their money. Nobody came to the house because people were starting to think that they are weird. And then they go into New Orleans proper. And they go to a shop that caters to white clientele. And when they go inside, the Duchamps are told that they need to leave their girl outside, so the girl being Gemma. So it's quite clear that the shop owner perceives the Duchamps as white, with the right to be there and to shop there, but Gemma being black, obviously not. However, when they go to their bank, Honorine Duchamp, the matriarch, looking as white as anyone, loaded, cannot go in through the front entrance, but has to go through the side entrance. Is put into kind of like a side office thingy to conduct her, like $1 million or hundreds of thousands of dollar transactions. So to me, it's like, how? I mean, either they are colored and then everybody knows, and then they are not allowed to shop there. They're not allowed to take the non-colored restrooms, or they are not, in which case, why is the bank treating them the way they are treating them. So it's very weird. And then disaster strikes. Laurence is killed in a very horrific way, because the first thing that they did was buy a car because they want to be able to commute to New Orleans proper. And one day, and everybody learns how to drive, and one day he is taking the car for a drive, and he drives behind a lorry that has, or truck, as you would say in the United States, and it's a logging lorry, and it's got loads and loads of tree trunks on it. And something happens, it swerves, the tree trunks come loose, they fall through the windscreen and basically decapitate the boy. It's a horrific death, which Ines, his mother, kind of has to witness. So she's kind of now broken after this, and she decides to leave, which I totally get. And she wants her daughter to come with her, but her daughter basically has a change of mind and decides, no, I want to help them because, you know, we might still die, because obviously this part of the curse is still in it seems to still work, although it's not been her birthday. So she jumps to the conclusion that this is not an accidental death, but that this is the curse, and it's now gone wild. And even then you kind of go, okay, that's a leap, that's some leap. I'm not even sure, because I mean, this looks like a perfect accident to me, but hey, okay, I'll take it. Okay, and I do understand that you do want to save your mum, so you basically say, okay, mum, take your lover, Dennis, and move, and I will stay back, and I will help these guys, and I will break the curse so that we can all live happily ever after, and heavily ever after. But she doesn't know where her mother goes, so that's kind of like weird as well. Anyway, so she goes back to the house, blah, blah, blah. She breaks the curse because she finds out doing research that... And at this stage, I'm like, it was mentioned, Gemma. Why did you not pick up on this? Because Honorine at one point says that there used to be an old kitchen which completely burnt down, and it was rebuilt next to and the new kitchen was rebuilt next to the old kitchen. Well, and she finds a secret room behind the room where Agnès has been sleeping for 28 years. And from there, she perceives this terribly smoky smell coming. You know, and she says, does anybody else smell it? And Ines is like, yeah. Ines also can see ghosts, as we learn. So I'm like, okay, it's so easy. Something terrible happened. Probably the former slave owner, because it turns out that the Negro-colored Duchamps owned slaves. They were slaves owners themselves. Probably one of the ancestors just massacred several slaves, probably burnt them in the kitchen, or maybe there was an accident and people burnt in the kitchen and they didn't, I don't know, they didn't bury them or something like that. You know, you catch on to this really, really early on in the book. I would say about halfway through, you kind of make that connection, you know. So the long story short is she uncovers the bodies, the bones, and in order to release the family from the curse, the family has to apologize for something that was done by their great-grandfather. She says it's the great-grandfather of Honorine, but to me that doesn't track with regard to timelines. It's maybe the great-grandfather of her mother. That would work better. But the way to release the ghosts and break the curse is for everybody to stand in a circle, hold hands and say, we apologize for what our ancestor did. And I'm like, no. And of course the ghosts rise up. Then they say the names of all the dead and the ghosts evaporate and the curse is broken. And that's where the whole book ended for me, because it keeps going after that. There are still some things and odds and ends and blah, 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 but that's not how this works. Or if it is, then that's the most stupid curse that I, as an angry spirit, could ever have come up with. Because whether you believe that it is possible to apologize for something somebody else did and this apology to matter is beside the point. Anyone can stand there and say, I apologize for blah, blah, blah. It's like thoughts and prayers. Like, you know, nobody really cares about thoughts and prayers. What you need to do is introduce better gun laws. in order to prevent people from killing people. Let's look at Dunblane in the United Kingdom, in Scotland, where nobody sent thoughts and prayers, but they just said, okay, everybody has to get rid of their guns because we don't want any more school shootings. So I apologize for something that my great-granddad did. No, it doesn't work like that, because the way you behave today is testament to this racism, to this cruelty towards people that you perceive as lesser beings. Because Granddad Duchamp, or great-granddad Duchamp, actually was white. At least he looked it. And he had this slave, Adam. And Adam wanted to buy his freedom. And he said, okay, yeah, you have to pay me X amount of dollars. So Adam takes on jobs left, right, and center. And he makes the money. And he says, I want to buy my freedom. He's like, no, actually, the price has gone up because commodities have risen in price. So it's now a lot more. And then Adam says, well, you know, I know your secret. I know that you are actually colored, or nigger, or whatever he calls it at that stage, because we are talking about the 1800s. And I will let everybody know. And I'm like, Adam, that was stupid. And he kills Adam and everybody else, and they burn in the kitchen. And he basically then writes in his diary, oh my God, the loss of property. I've just lost so much money in one go. That's the kind of person we're dealing with. But what he does is he decides after his death, he's going to go public with the fact that they are actually not white, but that they are colored, whatever, so that at least his descendants don't have to live under this shadow hanging over them, that somebody may say, oh, you are actually not white, and that they would, you know, like, that all of this would come to light. So he has all the privileges of a white person, and he revels in them, and he behaves like any other white slave owner would. But then he decides, okay, just to be sure that nobody else has to kind of like live with the burden of somebody maybe knowing, although he just killed off everybody who does know, I'm just going to go public, and I'm just going to basically put this curse of officially being called colored on my descendants. I mean, if there is any curse in this book, it's the curse that this great-granddad bestows upon his own offspring by turning them into black people in the eyes of the law. Because this has had all kinds of terrible outcomes for them. They are barred from doing all kinds of things. They can't go into they are rich, but most of the city of New Orleans in the 1900s, in the early 1900s, would have been closed off to them. Also in the late 1800s, you know, they are second-class citizens. But not only that, they revel in this. They totally think that everybody who's colored should be treated worse, although it does affect them, you know. That is the real weirdness about this book. And people who think like that, people who openly say, we don't want integrated schools, we don't want black people in our church. They are Roman Catholic, by the way, and the worst kind, because they are actually against Vatican II. And for those of you who don't know what Vatican II was, in the 50s, the then Pope held a council in Rome, and they debated, and then they introduced massive changes to the way, and this is the one that everybody would notice who was around in the 40s and went to church, and then again in the 50s, and that hasn't changed since then. They may have introduced other changes as well that I'm not really aware of, because the most important ones are Mass is no longer held in Latin, but in the language of the people that are being preached to. So it means that everybody who goes to church actually understands what's going on. That's a big plus. Number two, the priest turns towards the congregation. In the old days, the priest would be standing in front of the congregation and representing the congregation, who are just cowering peasants at the back, and speak to God in Latin. And he would be kind of like the wall between the normal person and God. And you can't bypass the priest. He is basically there speaking on your behalf, and you can't speak to God yourself. And also you don't speak Latin. And of course, God would only understand Latin. I mean, you know. They are completely opposed to this as well. This was one of the only times that the church tried to democratize its belief system and make it accessible to all, and change the rigidity of the hierarchy and give the lay people a little more access. And they're, of course, opposed to that as well. And, of course, black people in church, that's like terrible. You know, you can't have that. So this is the mindset of the Duchamps in the 60s. And this mindset doesn't change over the course of the book, which, of course, only covers a couple of months. So why would they suddenly change? And maybe I would have hated the book even more if they'd suddenly seen the light. But people like this, apologizing for something that their ancestor did, for which they are not sorry at all. I'm absolutely sure they are not sorry. They are doing this because they are being blackmailed into apologizing, because otherwise one of them might die. You know, they want to get rid of the curse. This is not an apology that is worth the breath or the paper it's written on or the breath with which it was uttered. But it's enough for the spirits. And I'm like, yeah, that's not how this works. I mean, that's so nonsensical. And like I said, the book itself is a really fast read. I read it through in 3 evenings. It would have only taken me 2 if I hadn't had another engagement that made me put down the book. It reads well. It's not a horror story. It's supernatural. There is no horror except unsettling behaviors by really nasty people. And yeah, I did think that this was unsettling, and I think that their mindset is unsettling. But there's no solution to this that is in any way realistic. Because, first of all, this is my personal opinion, it doesn't work like you're apologizing for someone else's crimes. It doesn't work like that, because it's worth nothing. It wasn't you who did it. If you do want to do something about prior crimes that maybe were committed by your family, you should start to atone. And atoning, in my opinion, is different. You act. So one way to atone would have been maybe to make this public, to say, we have done refurbishments on our house because now after 28 years we've come out of seclusion. They shouldn't tell anybody that they've been cursed because people might think that they're crazy. But, you know, just basically say, you know, and we have done major refurbishments to the house, and we have found the bones of 8 or 9 people. I can't remember how many there were. And we have uncovered in our family history what has happened. We are going to lay them to rest, and we're going to make this public. You know, that would be one way of atoning. If they can't look past the fact that they are racist bitches. They all are. If they can't get past this, then at least this would be one thing. This would make a difference. This would mean owning it, making sure that people know, and taking it to the next level. You can't take responsibility for something you didn't do, but you can atone. But they don't. And the book ends with Gemma leaving and them probably going off to Paris. They definitely have all the plans and all the money to do this. You know, it is flat. And that's, I think, actually a sad thing to say about a book. I couldn't care for any of them. They are terrible people. Gemma is okay. But even she doesn't, there's no character development. Except that also she starts crying and she lets go and she admits that she basically, you know, like, she forgives her adoptive parents. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, that's something that I take, because it's really her who needs to forgive, because only she can forgive her adoptive parents. It doesn't make any difference, except for you will feel a lot better if you forgive, which I'm not sure you do. But it's just, the book goes nowhere. And I'm not sure what the book is trying to do, because if it's a horror book, it's actually not horrific, like not at all. If it's supposed to be a social commentary, on what? I mean, racism is bad. Yes, we get it. There are black people who look white and who are just as racist as white people. Yeah, okay. That could have been dealt with in a short story. So I don't regret reading this book because I learned some things that I didn't know before. But I can't really recommend it. I mean, it's a waste of money and it's a waste of your time if you don't really, I mean, you don't really need to read this book. So I'm afraid I didn't DNF it because for that I really wanted to know this has to build up to something. This is the thing. This is a book full of promises that are never delivered upon, and I think it's a first novel. So she should go back to writing. If she's going to go down the horror path, she needs to ramp up the horrificness, please. But I think she could be a good writer. I think she's a good writer. She only needs to accept the fact that you have to have character development, you have to build up to something, and then it has to pay off. Even a bleak ending would have paid off. I could have actually imagined a better ending would have been if it turns out that the family is so beyond redemption because they can't cross that line, they can't atone, they can only pretend and pay lip service to apologizing, that the curse can't be broken, and that they are stuck with that sword hanging over them, that at any moment they may die. Because also the family line ends because Honorine is in her 80s. She cannot have any more children. Simone is in her 50s, so no chance there. Laurence dies, and Fosette has had a child by her cousin, and we find out that she's got a dead child in her cupboard or in her trunk, and she's been fixed up good. So obviously they have done something to her that she cannot have any more children. So the only person who could still beget children, I guess, is Russell, because he's in his 50s, so he could, if he found a woman, he could easily have more offspring if she's young enough. But that's also not likely from what I gather and the feelings that I get. So the only person who might have children is Gemma. But I'm not sure there either. But they are so far removed from the way the Duchamps, she's so far removed from the way the Duchamps think and behave, and also how they look, that probably that child would be brought up very differently. So the family is at an end. This line of the family that is so terrible is at an end. It's not going to continue. But I would have preferred if it had been really like, no, you are actually just paying lip service to this. You are not actually atoning. You are bad people. You stay cursed. That would have made a lot more sense. For them to actually have to live with the sin and not being able to close their eyes to it. If the spirits hadn't been able to, this would have been the perfect ending, that the spirits manifest to everybody. Because only Russell, it turns out, and Gemma can see them. If they had suddenly then meant to come to the house and stay and be with them and remind them of the bad people that they are and their ancestors have been, that would have been a good ending. It would have been a bleak ending, but it would have made sense. So yeah, that's This Cursed House. Like I said, it's not a recommendation. Talk to you soon. Bye.